So Hume thinks that the practical way that human beings should navigate their lives is on the basis of probabilities. Okay, he thinks we need to, first of all, knock science down a peg. And scientists aren't delivering us certain truths. They're not telling us things that have to be. What they are delivering for us, though, is, according to Hume, highly probable truths. Highly probable truths. And he thinks that we need to think of the whole of life in terms of probabilities in this way. Okay, and the probabilities increase in accordance with the number of instances that we have seen of a particular thing happening. Okay, so let me illustrate this now. This is a famous Humean concept. Let's imagine this is our probability scale. Here's like a weight on the scale. Here's another weight on the scale, one that's heavier than the other. So it's lower. Okay, and we'll say this represents more evidence, and the other represents less evidence. I've now seen several thousand instances of the sun rising in the east. More evidence. I haven't seen the sun rise in the west yet. Less evidence. Like a lot more evidence. For that reason, Hume says, I need to proportion my belief in an event happening in a particular way in the future in accordance with the probabilities based on the evidence that I have accumulated. Since the probabilities are now, oh shoot, I should really figure this out. What is it? 365 days a year on 39. That's, wow, that's a lot of years. Approximately maybe 13,000 days? Give or take? Maybe about 13,700? Somebody can correct me with the calculator. I'm just doing like approximation math here. That's my European 7. 13,700. Oh, Prosper's actually she's gonna do it.
It's not like you've seen the sun for every single one of those days.
Well, that's true. Some days have been entirely cloudy. Yeah. 14,200. Okay. This is like ballpark figure. Okay. It's 14,200 to 0. So that's a lot of reason for thinking that the sun is going to rise in the east tomorrow. Okay, and that's the way we should navigate our lives, according to Hume. And that's the way we should think about the sciences. They are probability-based disciplines grounded in historical instances, giving us evidence of the likelihood of future instances.
So does he think, probably with this, that there's absolutely no, like there's no critical mass of observable things that basically makes you think?
The only reasoning that can give us certain truth is deductive reasoning. Relations of ideas have the characteristics of deductive forms of reasoning. Matters of fact do not. Relations of ideas can be known with certainty, but matters of fact cannot. Yeah. Basically, everything that requires observation of a state of affairs in order to ascertain the truth of it, like as a proposition, we need to base our beliefs on the balance of the probabilities. We can't know that whatever that is, we can't know it's true for certain.
So physical reality is not, it's more of a probable truth than whatever metaphysical construction we can create.
Yes. So let's stick with Newton's second law as our example. That force equals mass times acceleration is less probable than that 8 and 8 are 16, because they are qualitatively different in kind as propositions. One is an observationally based proposition, and the other is a definitionally true proposition. Yeah. So let me so this, by the way, strikes me at first glance as being a very intuitive and reasonable way to go through life, and to think of the sciences as probability-based disciplines. Okay. But it's got some issues. Okay, so for instance, the chicken on the farm has not lived 14,200 days. I don't know how long chickens live. Let's say the chicken has lived 300 days. 300 to 0 is the evidence that the farmer brings gruel. And yet, today the farmer came to wring the chicken's neck. So this is a way of thinking about the world and about human experience and about how humans ought to navigate their lives and think of the sciences that works until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, potentially it could fail catastrophically. Okay, but do we have any questions about this? I'm gonna actually raise the stakes dramatically in a minute. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to raise the stakes dramatically in a minute. We are going to take a break first. But are there any questions about this way of thinking as an approach to human life and the sciences? Cool? Let's take a quick break. Okay, I want now to dramatically raise the stakes in our discussion of Hume's probability-based method for understanding human reasoning and the navigation of life. Okay. What's the most famous religious miracle of all time? The resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth from the dead. Okay? The historical accounts, as they've descended to us, tell us that this dude died, was crucified on a hill in Judea, was buried, and then a night passes, a day passes, and another night passes, and then he's walking around again. This is an extraordinary claim. Like really, really extraordinary. And if this claim is true, then basically nothing else matters in life. Like it is far and away the most important thing ever in life, if this claim happens to be true. Okay, if this claim is false, then quite obviously Christianity is a sham. Okay? Because Christianity requires the actual physical resurrection of Jesus, which is the central point, the central claim at the heart of this religion. Okay? And I believe in the resurrection of the actual bodily, physical resurrection of Jesus, and that's why I'm a Christian. Okay? Among other reasons. All right. Now, let us look, though, at the evidence. A whole bunch of people have died in history, haven't they? I don't know how many people have died in history. 15 billion. Are you actually Googling this, Prosper? I think the population right now is about 7.5 billion. Okay, so let's make this number a little bit larger. Let's say it's 20 billion who have died. Is that correct? Okay, 20 billion have died. Now, there are a couple of other resurrection accounts, right? Lazarus and, a couple of others, like a little boy who Elijah raises and things like that. All right, but let's just say, for the sake of this example, we'll just say one. Okay? So according to Hume, which should we favor? The sham story. This is a sham. Or a confusion. too many shrooms. Something was going on, and people didn't understand what was going on, right? Okay, now, the gospel accounts, oh, how many people have died? 100 billion. Oh, I was way off on this one. Yeah, no, there's no papering this one over. I wasn't even in the ballpark. Okay, wow, 100 billion. So we're like, those people who say that, like, I guess there will never be more people alive than there have been dead.
Yeah, this year I instead of thinking that, because I looked at how many people have ever been born on Earth,
Mm-hmm.
and we estimate about 108 billion, so obviously probably
Sure.
more alive.
About 100 billion, yeah. Wow, fascinating. Okay, so according to Hume, actually, you shouldn't believe the miracle story in the case of Jesus of Nazareth. The balance of the evidence favors the other side. Okay, and this is his argument in section 10 of the Inquiry. He's got a lengthy discourse on supernatural involvement in the world. Okay, this section got him in a lot of trouble in the 18th century. Okay, because back then atheists were not nearly as prevalent as they are now. And so thinking that seemed like atheist-style thinking lost him a lot of academic positions and a lot of funding. Okay, but in section 10 of the Inquiry, he goes on to argue that, look, for any miracle, not just the death and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth, but any miracle story, the balance of evidence always favors the skeptical side and not the miracle side. Okay, because, quite frankly, the number of instances always favors the skeptical side. And so Hume's conclusion on this basis is you should never believe a miracle story. Okay, you hear about somebody's cancer being healed. Doctors are mystified. They say, we don't know what happened to you. Maybe God has intervened on your behalf. Okay, don't believe it, Hume says. Because the great majority of cancers tell in the other direction, right? It either responds to chemo or it doesn't. But the idea that there's supernatural intervention is something that Hume would say we should not believe because it doesn't have the balance of evidence on its side. Okay, this applies to all miracles of every kind. Somebody's leg gets healed, don't believe it. Okay, now this is a very famous critique of miracles and of supernatural involvement in the world. Okay, and it's been very influential. It's also touched off a whole cottage industry of refutations of Hume. A whole bunch of philosophers have taken pen in hand to refute this way of thinking as an approach to the world. Okay, and basically, the refutation of Hume takes the following form. Okay, remember our chicken story? The chicken only had 300 instances, okay, but the point is the same. The chicken was wrong even though he had a bunch of instances on his side. So basically the refutation of Hume, when it comes to his criticism of the miraculous, is that, Hume, you're right. We should believe the side that has the balance of evidence on it. And in fact, you're right in saying that a miracle is an incredibly improbable event. So improbable as to be highly unlikely. And the literature that philosophers have come up with basically boils down to this point. But that's what makes it a miracle. Right? That's why we call it a miracle. So basically you haven't done anything other than define what a miracle is. Okay, so just as the chicken with his 300 instances does not prove that the farmer will not come today to wring his neck, so also the 100 billion instances of people dying and not coming to life again do not prove that someone, Jesus of Nazareth did not do this back in history in Judea in approximately 33 AD. Okay, so it's a very famous point and counterpoint in philosophy. Hume's criticism of the miraculous and then the philosophical literature responding to it. There's actually a lot more to it than just that, but I want to start the discussion by just referencing the probability there. Okay, questions or comments about that? Everybody good with that? I have a little bit of time left, and I want to use it efficiently. Okay, so I'm actually going to do a quick background topic as a preface to a deeper investigation of probability with regard to philosophy of religion. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick background topic. And that is the relationship of the divine with the world, or the supernatural with the world. Okay, in the West, the Western philosophical tradition, there are basically three models for understanding the interaction of the supernatural with the world. Okay, so among theists, those who believe in God, there are basically three models. Okay, Model 1 we'll call deism. And on this view, here's God, and here's the world. And God and the world don't really interact. Okay, God created the world, deists think. God wound it up, but then he let it go. And now he doesn't really take an interest in it. Okay, and there have been a lot of famous deists in history. I think Thomas Jefferson was a deist. Ben Franklin was a deist. A bunch of late 18th century American founders were deists. Not all of them, but some of them. There have been other famous deists. Aristotle is a deist. Okay, he believes in a first mover, a prima mobile, but he doesn't think that the first mover takes any interest in human affairs. Okay, on the other side, there's another basic view of the relationship between the supernatural and the world, and we could call that pantheism. This view is pantheism. This view is that God is not separate from the world, rather, God is the world, and the world is God. God is in the world, and the world is in God. On this view, God is in the rock, God is in the tree, God is in you, God is in me. Okay, and there's really no distinction because God is so deeply involved in the world as to be indistinguishable from it. Okay, neither one of these is the Orthodox Christian view. Okay, the Orthodox Christian view is not deism, it's not pantheism, it is rather interactionism. Interactionism. And on interactionism, God is separate from the world, and yet God and the world interact. So God is a separate entity from the world and can't be defined with respect to the world. However, God and the world interact with each other. Okay, this interaction takes place in a variety of ways. Quite obviously, the most prevalent form of interaction is God's creation of the world. Okay, on the Orthodox Christian views, God is the creator of the world. Creates it out of ex nihilo, as the formula goes, out of nothing. Okay, so God regularly, God has in the past made the world, but also on the interactionist view, God regularly involves himself in the world. Okay, on the interactionist view, though, also things in the world impact God. For instance, Have you ever asked God for things in prayer? Okay, I do every day. Okay, I pray every day, have an extensive prayer time every day. And part of my prayer time is I ask God for things. And I think that asking God for things changes something. Okay, because my scriptural texts tell me it does. Okay, my scriptural texts tell me that prayer in some way changes the situation. Okay, it impacts God. Now that's an incredible kind of claim, especially if you believe in a God who is omnipotent and omniscient. Like, think about the metaphysics of that for a minute. How is that possible, right? So God, does his mind get changed? Is like he thought one thing and then you throw up some prayers and God's like, I changed my mind as a result of your prayers. I don't know. Like, was he not convinced of the correctness of a particular course of action before, and now after I've prayed for that course of action, he's convinced of it? I'm not sure. Okay, I don't know how petitionary prayer works. I believe it does work, but I'm not sure of the mechanics of it. Okay, but petitionary prayer is an example of the Orthodox Christian teaching in interactionism that the world impacts God. Okay, and the world in some way shapes God or influences God. Not sure how it happens. Okay, but the teaching is that it does. Okay. The closer these two come to each other, what are our faith backgrounds? Baptist? Faith background? Catholic? Non-denominational. All of us have a Christian faith background, is that correct? Okay. Probably Prosper would be the only one among us who might have grown up in a setting like I did. I grew up in a charismatic church. Do they raise hands in your church? Do they heal in your church? Okay. Do people fall over in your church? They do?
Have you heard of Christ?
I don't think so.
Oh, but yeah, they did the whole spiel, shaking and the yelling, falling over.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. All right. Basically, so what she's describing is a classic charismatic theology. Okay. And the charismatic teaching is that God and the world not only interact regularly, they interact a whole lot. And the connections between God and the world are many. And God speaks in dreams. And God heals. And prophecies occur, right? So there's constant involvement of the supernatural in the world. Okay? Now, if you're more of the, Stoic type of faith backgrounds, right? I have been in many churches before where if God actually showed up in that way in the church service, they would be horrified. Right? Like, we have a set order to the schedule. Like, we've got to get through the hymns. We have to get through the sermon, right? And if God actually shows up and does these kinds of disruptive things, like, we don't want any part of that. Okay. So that faith tradition basically attempts to distance. It also holds to interactionism. All Christians hold to interactionism. But it holds to a more distanced form of interactionism. Kind of a tamer God, a God who is like less disruptive and unpredictable. Because the problem in the charismatic tradition, of course, is always, it's kind of like unleashed. Like, what do you do? Like, it's kind of dangerous. Okay. I grew up in a charismatic church, and I'm actually now in a Baptist church. But like most Americans, I've had a kind of a mutt-like faith journey, okay, and have gone to an Anglican church for a long time before settling it in my current Baptist church. Okay. But Christians then vary on the extent of the interaction. Some denominations, in their background, that interaction is more distanced and it's rare. Others, it's more frequent, it happens continually. But all Christians hold to an interactionist view. This is the view that Hume wants to attack in section 10 of the Inquiry. Okay, he wants to attack that. He's not attacking deism. He seems to be okay with deism, at least as he renders it in section 10. Because as long as God isn't actually involved in the world, he thinks that that's defensible from a rational perspective. And pantheism is not really something that's on his radar. There isn't really a pantheist tradition in the West until the West encounters Hinduism and other Eastern forms of thinking, okay, that suggest that God is actually in things. And so that doesn't really get going until the 20th century, late 19th century, early 20th century. But he's primarily targeting interactionism in section 10. Okay, we're going to explore that at greater length next week and talk about some other related issues in Hume. Are there any questions at this point about this background preface discussion?
So, the fact that you're in the Baptist church now, does that mean that you are more of a Muslim?
I have moved over time away from the view that holds that God frequently interacts in the world in the ways that the charismatic traditions teach. And I have moved toward the view that God frequently acts in the world in more subtle and less recognizable ways. Yeah, so that's what I've moved toward as time has passed. And I don't want to like spike anybody's faith tradition or anything, but I would say the decisive thing for me was people in charismatic backgrounds that I was a part of asserting that God had told them something, when in fact it pretty clearly was something that they just wanted to be the case. And they were projecting that upon God and adding a sort of gravitas to it by saying, God told me this. And like after I saw that a bunch of times, I began to lose confidence in that as a way that God is actually, it's like, God didn't tell you that, you just made that up. Right? Now, I totally believe God tells people things, but I don't think it happens as frequently as some people would like to think that it does.
Yeah, I feel like the charismatic view kind of approach to how we interact with God was true, like as close as they projected most churches. I feel like that would be a really big problem with like the fact of our free will.
Yeah.
Because God, God himself wanting us to have free will, if he's like interjecting so
It's like
much,
overwhelming people's
overwhelming
ability
people,
to function, yeah.
So and then it's just too much for me. Because I felt like in church it just feels like a performance and just people like showing up and stuff. I don't know.
Well, our ancestors, so we're all post-Enlightenment types now, but the Charismatics are actually much more like pre-Enlightenment Christianity. So our ancestors, and I'm talking about way back in the past, like 500 or 800 years ago, they much more regularly looked around themselves and saw a world that was animated with constant spiritual forces than we do. Okay, so they saw, like if you had nightmares, they saw that as demons, like attacking you during your sleep. Right? And we would say, no. It's just like, you ate something for dinner or that like we come up with this pseudoscientific explanation for it that, makes us feel good because we're post-Enlightenment types. But like pre-Enlightenment Christians hold a view of the world that's much more animated with regular spiritual forces than most post-Enlightenment Christians. The charismatic view is actually much closer to pre-Enlightenment Christianity than most other contemporary Christian denominations are.